Support for WUWM podcast comes from Hop Harvest and Vine and Good Harvest Market in Pewaukee, part of One Destination, combining farm-to-table dining, local craft beers, and organic groceries under one roof. More at goodharvestmarket.com.
Lake Effect brings you conversations about what's happening in Milwaukee and the people, places, and organizations that shape our community. This is Lake Effect Spotlight from WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.
Wisconsin's drinking water is facing a growing crisis of nitrate contamination. That's according to a new report by the Alliance for the Great Lakes. Nitrates are commonly caused by fertilizers, manure, and agricultural runoff. They can be harmful to people at high levels, and in Wisconsin, agriculture accounts for 90% of nitrate contamination. But communities are often left footing the bill for cleanup. Angela Blatt is the Senior Agriculture Policy Manager at the Alliance for the Great Lakes. She joins me now to talk about the report. Angela, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
We're going to start with a really basic question. What are nitrates?
Nitrate is a contaminant that we find in groundwater. It is the most widespread contaminant in Wisconsin's groundwater. And it forms when oxygen combines with nitrogen-rich sources such as fertilizer, manure, or waste from something like septic tanks. And it's able to go into groundwater by way of rain or melting snow. And this typically occurs in places with shallow soil or fragmented bedrock. So in Wisconsin, it's mostly in the eastern and western portions of the state, as well as the south central portion.
So is this essentially runoff that's coming from maybe a farm or from, as you mentioned, septic tanks, that kind of thing?
Sure, yeah. So nitrate loss estimates from crop production can vary based on different factors, but studies indicate that an average of more than 25% of applied nitrogen does leach into groundwater as nitrate. And in Wisconsin, 90% of nitrate in the groundwater comes from application of those nitrogen-containing fertilizers that I mentioned, so manure, commercial fertilizer, and biosolids.
So a lot of it's coming from our agriculture, it sounds like.
It is, yes.
How are nitrates dangerous to people and animals? What are the kinds of things it can cause?
Nitrate exposure has been linked to some serious health effects, including some types of cancers, as well as pregnancy complications, and then infant methylhemoglobinemia, which has a common term as blue baby syndrome, also can have some issues and harm to animals and livestock if ingested.
One of the big concerns that comes out of this report is just, I think, just the scale of nitrate contamination that we're seeing here in Wisconsin. What does that look like right now?
Well, since more than 75% of the state does rely on groundwater for drinking water, and we've seen nitrate loads increase statewide since 2013, while the overall trends do indicate a persistent and increasing nitrate problem, certain areas of the state are particularly vulnerable and more susceptible to that groundwater contamination. And while the federal government regulates nitrate in public drinking water systems, it doesn't regulate that in groundwater, which leaves our private wells unprotected.
So for groundwater, what are the communities that are generally relying on groundwater? Is that a community that you'd see here in the city of Milwaukee, or are we talking about more rural areas?
Yeah, about 1/3 of Wisconsin families rely on private wells, and so that's estimated about 1.7 million people in the state, and that's about 800,000 private wells. And they tend to be more affected in rural areas or areas that are seeing more heavy agricultural use.
Sure. And now, of course, groundwater has been greatly impacted, but as your report mentions, this is not just an issue in groundwater, it's also an issue in other water sources. What is the scale outside of groundwater of the contamination of nitrates in the water?
Yeah, so when we look at runoff and surface water, we're seeing that run into rivers that then drain into the Great Lakes, and we're seeing more intense and longer lasting harmful algal blooms in the Great Lakes, and nitrates definitely contribute to the toxicity of those algal blooms. So as we see more nitrate runoff, then we're seeing the toxicity of those algal blooms increase.
What is the impact of these algae blooms?
Yeah, well, we're seeing in areas where the algal blooms are present, it's causing beach closures. Folks are advised not to enter the water when we're seeing algal blooms in the Great Lakes. And then it can cause issues with water treatment systems that serve folks for drinking water, like we saw with the Toledo water crisis in 2014.
And that seems like one of the big concerns here. Water treatment centers, of course, do treat the water, as one might suggest, but the impact of these nitrates seems to then affect communities who are then paying greater amounts of money in order to get rid of these nitrates. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's true. So in the report, we did look at 4 case studies and found that municipalities are also bearing that financial burden for nitrate contamination. So in the 4 communities that we looked at, they have spent more than $45 million on nitrate mitigation, and that can come in the form of treatment, upgrades to the systems, or even possibly well replacement. And then these costs often force public water systems to raise rates, and then that passes the financial burden directly to the ratepayers.
As you mentioned, you looked at a number of communities here in Wisconsin specifically. What were the kinds of things that you heard from people living in these communities about how nitrates are affecting their lives?
Yeah, so we did talk to private well owners in the state, and when a private well is contaminated with nitrate, those individuals that aren't currently served by a public water system, they could either replace their well with a deeper or deeper cased well, or add some type of on-site filtration system. Of the private well owners that we did survey, 9 experienced nitrate contamination levels exceeding the 10 milligrams per liter standard, and of the 10 well owners, 2 had to fully replace a well, and the cost ranged from $7,500 up to over $22,000. And then a couple of other participants said that they would eventually need a new well, and it was at the estimated cost of between 15 and 20,000. One of our well owners ran a daycare business and estimated that the cost of replacing her well could be as much as $75,000. So the cost is definitely not insignificant. And even if you choose a treatment system rather than well replacement, you could still spend thousands on nitrate treatment. So a reverse osmosis system could cost anywhere from 600 to 3,000 in upfront costs, plus an additional $600 per year to maintain. And then some folks end up still having to drill a new well. And then I'll just add that while these systems can filter nitrate, they rarely treat well water down to zero, so some level of nitrate will still likely be present.
If you're just tuning in, this is Lake Effect. I'm Joy Powers, and I'm speaking right now with Angela Blatt from the Alliance for the Great Lakes. We're talking about the impact of nitrates in our water here in Wisconsin. Now, something that your report also talks about is the kinds of barriers there are to fixing this problem here in Wisconsin, and how other states are, in some ways, doing better than Wisconsin in confronting the issue of nitrates. What are some of the barriers to solving this problem in our water systems, and how are other states negotiating this in a different way?
Yeah, so when we looked at some of the programs and policies that are in place in Wisconsin, we realized that we need like a combination of actions to address the contamination that we have now, and a more proactive approach to reduce the risk of nitrate loss to ground and surface water as we move forward. So some of the recommendations that we cover in the report are creating a statewide well testing program that helps offset the costs of water testing for homeowners and streamlines access to those sampling programs, because right now there's a requirement or a comprehensive program for well owners to be able to even test their water. So a third of private well owners haven't even had their water tested or know the nitrate level. that they are experiencing. Another thing we looked at was the private well compensation program. The current program in place is rather restrictive, and the eligibility requirements make it inaccessible for some folks. To qualify for the existing program, the nitrate contamination has to exceed 40 milligrams per liter. And as you recall, 10 milligrams per liter is the federal standard, so that's 4 times the level that's considered safe today. And then also there are strict income limits and requirement that the well must also provide livestock more than 100 gallons per day, which this makes the program kind of out of reach for many Wisconsin families. We talked about the cost that municipalities have to face for treating nitrate contamination. We're recommending that municipalities track and report nitrate-related costs for public water systems. So these water utilities already provide information to the Public Service Commission each year, and we feel like ratepayers deserve to know the costs that they're incurring to remove the nitrates from their drinking water, because as of right now, that's not required to track that information.
What are some of the long-term revisions that the Alliance notes are necessary to really answering this issue?
We did look at some short-term, medium-term, and long-term policy recommendations. And long-term, just some of those are, update the state water and agriculture standards to reduce nitrate pollution, reevaluate the state nitrate groundwater and drinking water standards, and establish targeted performance standards that set stronger fertilizer and manure application requirements in areas with that high contamination level, and then also set a surface water limit for nitrate. Another recommendation that we had for the longer term is to improve enforcement of nitrate management plans. So the state cost share funding of any kind for farms should be contingent on having and following an approved nutrient management plan. Right now, 40% of agriculture land is covered under nutrient management plans. And adoption of this practice has remained relatively stagnant over the last few years, despite thousands of dollars of cost share that's going, out the door for this program. Wisconsin needs a coordinated statewide response that addresses nitrate pollution at its source. So we have some outdated policies that we talked about, and then voluntary programs that are making some strides, but they're just not enough. And we need some stronger standards and smarter nutrient management and some meaningful investments in clean water. And I think without action, nitrate contamination will just continue to pollute the drinking water, endanger those communities, and harm ecosystems and drive up costs for both farmers and ratepayers alike.
Well, Angela, thank you so much for joining us here on Lake Effect and sharing your work.
Thank you so much.
Angela Blatt is the Senior Agriculture Policy Manager at the Alliance for the Great Lakes. She's also one of the authors of the Alliance's new report on the high levels of nitrates in Wisconsin drinking water.
You can find more interviews like this one by visiting wuwm.com/Lake Effect. And while you're there, subscribe to the Lake Effect Spotlight podcast.